Good afternoon, everyone. We'll come to order and welcome to the meeting. Thanks, everyone, for showing up today. We're very pleased today to have representatives from ITK with us today. Nathan Obed, the president, and Jack Hicks, adjunct professor, community health and epidemiology, University of Saskatchewan, will be speaking, as well as Nathan Obed. Wonderful to have you both with us. I'm happy to offer you 10 minutes each, and I understand, Mr. Hicks, that you're going to go first and that you've got a PowerPoint. And I would just mention to members, if you have any trouble seeing the screen with the lights, we can't turn the lights down because of we're being televised, but the PowerPoint is available in your digital binder on your iPads if you'd prefer to look at it there. I will just let you know about my cards. You have 10 minutes. I'll show a yellow card at 9 minutes and a red card and ask you to finish up when you see the red card. Thank you very much for that. And Mr. Hicks, please, you have the floor.
Okay. And is my mic on?
Yes. It is.
Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you on traditional Algonquin territory. I think the reason I was invited was because when I was living in Nunavut, I was the government suicide prevention advisor. At that time, I had opportunity to work very closely with Nathan Obed, who I hold in the highest of regard, so it's always a pleasure to be presenting with Nathan. I have both languages, so I'll just go tap each time. So I've shown this graph hundreds of times, and every time I look at it, it fills me with sadness and with shame, frankly, as a Canadian. What this shows us is the evolution of the rate of suicide by Inuit living in Nunavut from below the national average in the 1960s and 70s up to the present day. For the last 15 years, the rate has been just under 10 times the national average. So I was going to, I heard Kathy McLeod ask about trends. The reason I can do this is because in the territories, death certificates are coded by ethnicity. So the reason that you don't have something similar like this for First Nations in the provinces is because in the provinces, no death certificates are coded by ethnicity. So this is a rare example of being able to document a pretty serious epidemiological transition from a low suicide rate society to a high suicide rate community. The rate is highly structured by age and sex, so the most at-risk population are young men. This is not the structure of most of the society. It's also structured by geography, so the red dots are the communities with the highest rates. You'll see they're overwhelmingly in the Kikitani region, plus one community in the west. And I think this is explainable based on modern social history. It's an odd thing to talk about mental health outcomes of individual ethnic groups, I realize, but if we look at the states where we do have data broken out by ethnicity, we see, for example, however uncomfortable we might feel about the concept of race as used in the United States, this is official government data, and it shows that black people in the United States die by suicide at a much lower rate than white people do. And we can talk about that, but it's a fact. If we put Canada in for comparison as a whole, because we don't have this kind of data, we come in between the two, Asians and Hispanics are much closer to blacks than to whites. If we add in the American Indian Alaska Native population, so that's the official coding, American Indian Alaska Native, very interesting. At the national level, white people and American Indian Alaska Natives have effectively the same rate of suicide across the United States. But it's structured differently. Much higher rates among younger people, among Indigenous Americans, higher among older white Americans. And if we look at the state level, we see that there's one state, Alaska, that has a rate of over 40 per 100,000. But there's another state, Texas, with 100,000 Indigenous people that has a rate of under 4 per 100,000. So the rate varies massively in the United States at the state level, only among American Indians, Alaska Natives, not among other ethnicities. The logic I take from that is that Aboriginality per se is not a risk factor. It's the lived conditions of being Aboriginal in different parts of the United States. If we were to take Alaska out from the rest of the Indigenous population, we see that actually a lot of the youth suicide is in Alaska. and that in the southern states, youth suicide isn't as big a problem as it is in Alaska. And if we take it one step further and put in Nunavut, we see the scale of Inuit youth suicide in Nunavut in comparison to Alaska and the rest of the United States. It's pretty shocking. So, as we know, suicide behavior is complex and multi-causal, but the WHO has said for years it's a largely preventable public health problem. And I think we should focus on both parts of that. Largely preventable, public health problem. And we need to look in terms of cohorts of people who die by suicide. For example, people whose first suicide attempt, whether it's completion or not, is later in life, have one basket of risk factors. People who attempt as teenagers or in their early 20s have a different pattern of risk factors. In our higher risk Indigenous communities, keeping in mind that the rates vary highly among our community, it's the basket of risk factors for young people that we need to be thinking about. We did do a 5-year CIHR-funded follow-back study in Nunavut, supported by everybody. We looked at all 120 deaths in 4 years, matched with case controls. The reports are online. We did not find risk factors that were unique to Inuit. We found the usual risk factors operating at a much higher level in some cases. The conclusion is mental health matters, and there's a need to focus on families and communities as well as individual level issues. As I mentioned, I was with Natan, part of the team that developed the Nunavut suicide prevention strategy, which I think we're very proud of. It was very well received when it came out. There's a link to it. Unfortunately, the initial years of implementation have not gone well. But as you may know, last year the Nunavut government declared a state of suicide crisis, created the world's first minister responsible for suicide prevention position, and we're hoping that things will be taken more seriously in the near future. So I just want to show you rates for Inuit in Nunavut and Inuit in Greenland and point something out. We have data from Greenland for the period 1900 to 1930 from the first chief medical officer of health, a rate of 3 per 100,000. I've gone through RCMP files and I've calculated a rate of 20 for the period of 1925 to 1945. But across the Arctic, across Inuit societies, starting in the late 60s, early 70s, everywhere, the rate takes off. And let me point out, it's not the people who were coerced into settled communities by the government as adults who started dying by suicide. It was the first generation of children to grow up in the settlements. In those early days where there was a lot happening in terms of power and people being bossed around. Very interesting data from New Zealand, more detailed data than we have for Canada, showing that Maori have transitioned from a society with lower than national norms use of mental health services and lower than national norms of suicide behavior to higher rates. But if you do the analysis, and the data is from the Christchurch Human Development Study, it's linked at the bottom, if you control for socioeconomic childhood disadvantage, family adversity, and other socioeconomic factors, Maoriness disappears. People aren't not well because they're Maori. They're not well because one section of the Maori community is poor, low educational outcomes, high rates of substance abuse. There's a lot of Maori who don't fit that profile, but those Maori who are in trouble in their lives, their kids grow up in trouble, just like other people's kids in those conditions grow up in trouble, and that's changing. So it teaches us that when we talk about mental health outcomes among Maori, we know too much to be able to talk about the Maori as if it's one group of people. There are Maori who are doing well, and there are Maori who are not doing well, just like everybody else. We see in the new Australian Indigenous strategy that accompanies the national strategy the focus on the developmental precursors of suicide and suicide behavior, understanding that early childhood adversity can put people on a pathway to trouble in life, the end result of which might be suicide behavior. Invest upstream, take a public health approach so fewer people need services as teenagers and adults. I watched the video from the 31st. I heard several references to Quebec. how interesting that Canada is a backwards country when it comes to suicide prevention. We're one of the few developed countries not to have a national strategy. But within Canada, we have one of the one of the greatest success stories in the world. That's why the International Association for Suicide Prevention met in Montreal last year to talk about Quebec. To cut a province's rate of youth suicide in half in a decade is fantastic. And I hope you look into how they did it. I can suggest people you might want to talk to. I've taken the liberty of coming up with 6 short references for you, which I can deliver in 1 minute. Number 1, carefully recommend the landmark 2014 WHO report, Preventing Suicide, a Global Imperative. Yes, it took the WHO too long to release this report, but it's great. It's weak on Indigenous peoples, but it's a great report generally. Second, when it comes to elevated rates of suicide behavior in some Indigenous communities, because let's be clear, not all Indigenous communities have high rates of suicide in this country. We know that. Take a look at the evidence, pay attention to the realities of social disadvantage, unresolved grief, early childhood adversities, the need for culturally appropriate mental health care. There's a lot of, not prejudice, but there's a lot of nonsense spoken in the media about the root causes of suicide and Indigenous behaviors. Some of it is pretty unpleasant in its characteristic of Indigenous peoples. You have to get down to actual results. There is substantial evidence, clear and compelling evidence, the size of the Himalayas, on the relationship between poverty, socioeconomic inequality, mental health outcomes, and suicide behavior. The world isn't always as complicated as some people make it out to be. I would urge the federal government to ask on the WHO's recommendations and Quebec's success by developing and implementing a national strategy for suicide prevention. Mr. McLeod asked on the 31st, where's the strategy? You can make a strategy happen for everybody, not just Indigenous peoples. I would urge you to allow the national Indigenous organizations to determine the character of what suicide prevention should consist of in their regions. Nobody has given more thought to suicide prevention in Inuit communities than Inuit themselves. I would urge the federal government to support ITK's forthcoming national Inuit suicide prevention strategy with the allocation of resources commensurate with the high social burden of suicide behavior in Inuit communities. If Inuit youth had been dying at this rate from HIV/AIDS, there would have been a coordinated federal intervention because it's a communicable disease. How do we explain the lack of action on shocking levels of teen suicide for 25 years? Let's get over it. Let's do it. And finally, on a personal level, I'm an assist trainer. I teach 2-day applied suicide intervention skills training workshops. I think it's great. I wouldn't do it if I didn't think it was great. I encourage you as individuals back in your home communities, take assist. You won't regret it. And if you'd like to know how you can do that, drop me a line and I'll make it happen for you. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Mr. Hicks. That 10 minutes went very quickly.
And I don't need to turn it off.
It's okay. You don't have to. Natan, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah. My name is Natan Obed. I'm the president of Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami, the national representational organization for Canada's 60,000 Inuit. The first objective in our 2016 to 2019 strategic plan is to take action to prevent suicide among Inuit. So it is a priority of the highest degree for our national organization and for all Inuit in Canada to do something meaningful to prevent suicide. I want to open by talking about how it affects each and every one of us. This is a huge difference between the Inuit population or anyone who lives within an Inuit community and those who live in southern Canada. Each one of us is personally affected by suicide, and this comes from a very early age. And it affects our entire life course, and it is something that is always with us. Imagine a scenario where you grow up understanding how to die by suicide. You have friends, family members, loved ones who have died by suicide, and that suicide is normalized in your community to an extent that it is used sometimes even as a bargaining tactic or something that is a threat rather than something that is a situation that is not normal and one that demands immediate attention and mobilization from communities and from governments. We all live in this reality, and not one of us wants to see another day that we live in this reality. So what you're doing here and what this government, the House did in its special debate is being watched by all Inuit, and we do hope that it translates into action for Inuit moving forward to prevent suicide. I also want to recognize all those people in our communities from the 1970s to today who have done amazing work to prevent suicide with absolutely no help or very little help. And it goes from the faith-based community to those who are champions in our community for people who are at risk. That doesn't necessarily mean that there is no mental health system, but for too many years, individuals in our communities have had to pick up an enormous burden of caring for the mental wellness and mental health of many of those who are most at risk in our communities. And that is something that will continue to exist, but should not be, in many cases, the only way that suicide prevention happens in many of our communities. Over the past 2 months, there has been a national discussion about suicide prevention and suicide by Indigenous peoples. I was at the special debate, and I listened to many well-meaning members of Parliament talk about how important this issue is. But I would say that I came away frustrated and have continued to be frustrated by the way in which the discussion has happened to date. It is as if Indigenous suicide and Inuit suicide is something completely outside of a public health context. And somehow the answers only lie with us and us alone. Many times when we, as the National Inuit Organization, or individuals who are Inuit, are asked by very well-meaning Canadians what needs to be done, the response that those people are looking for is one that has nothing to do with creating social equity, nothing to do with providing mental health services, nothing to get beyond historical or intergenerational trauma. What they're looking for in many cases is a particular component of suicide prevention that is Indigenous only, that usually has something to do with on-the-land camps or cultural continuity, that is relatively cheap and has nothing to do with the relationship between government services and overarching populations and their overarching health. We need to change that discussion. For our part, Inuit Taprit Kanatami will release a national Inuit suicide prevention strategy on July 27th. In this strategy, we talk about why suicide happens the way that it does in our communities, and also what is necessary to prevent suicide in Inuit communities. You might find this strange, but our people do not have one common united narrative about why suicide happens in our communities. Many times the discussions happen about the final step from somebody who is at risk of suicide, who thinks of suicide, and then attempts or completes suicide. And all of the discussion about why it happened is just in that particular moment in time when we live in an environment of suicide. From the time many of our children are in the womb, they're at risk of suicide in a different way because of the environment in which our children grow up and the environment in which our people live. So the discussion about why suicide is the way it is as follows. We have to do a great deal to achieve social equity. our society has gone through massive historical changes in the last 50 to 60 years. As Jack Hicks mentioned, you can see with the suicide rates elevating within the 1970s, corresponding with the first generation of children who grew up in communities. We need to do more to ensure that we have proper education systems, that we have proper mental health systems, that we have justice systems that reflect our needs, that we address violence and sexual abuse in our communities, that we end poverty. And social equity is that first societal step that we need to take that is necessary to improve our mental health and ultimately to prevent suicide. Then it gets to the community level, where we have a number of different things that happen in normal communities that do not happen in our communities. Programs and services, connections between generations, things that allow for coping skills to be created, things that build resilience. If you think about from the evidence base, we think of risk factors and protective factors. And we have a society of societal risk factors and individual risk factors. We do not have the appropriate measures in the protective factors that build resilience in our communities to be able to go through, for our society as a whole, to come through hard times. Every individual will go through difficult times in their lives. It is a lifetime of experiences and a lifetime of relationships with your family, with yourself, and with your mental health system and health systems in general, and your communities that craft the responses to those difficult times. And we need to do more to ensure that at the community level, there are supports for all of our community members to overcome hardship. On the individual level, we have a number of different things that we can do to provide mental health services and supports for those who are at risk of suicide. And that means improving some of our mental health acts. It means improving mental health services at the community level. It means incorporating Inuit-specific healing practices within the mental health continuum. We need a mental health continuum to overcome the challenges that people face on a day-to-day basis. And then when people are experiencing acute stress, and this gets to the individual level, where a lot of the discussion about suicide takes place in suicide prevention, we need people who can help. We need interventions for those who are at risk. There are usually 3 ways to break down suicide prevention: prevention, interventions, and postventions. And at the intervention stage, when people are at the most risk, programs like Assist that arm community members with the ability to identify those at risk and link them to care are great examples of how we can prevent suicide in a way that we have not done previously. So our strategy will present options or present actions that will create meaningful change in our community and will prevent suicide. I'd like to leave with an association between what has happened in relation to lung cancer over the past 50 to 60 years with what must happen with Inuit suicide prevention in the coming 50 to 60 years. In the beginning, there was not even a recognition of the causes of lung cancer, especially in relation to smoking. But over the course of generations, and upstreams investments in public health measures to ensure that people knew the risks and took mitigative actions so that they would not develop lung cancer, we have arrived in a very different place. But those who do have lung cancer, we treat. We treat through radiation, we treat through medication, and then we also have palliative care for those who are beyond that stage of treatment. It is as if today, with Inuit suicide prevention, that we only allow for very small palliative care type interventions for our people. We do not have the requisite upstream investments in social equity. We do not have the requisite interventions and mental health facilities and mental health continuum of care for Inuit that would allow for people to get through difficult times and to have positive mental health. And we certainly don't have enough to ensure that our communities can be healthy and can be happy and can be productive in a way that we believe is the way that we were before we moved to communities and before all this colonization happened. So I look forward with working with each and every one of you to make the meaningful changes necessary to prevent suicide for Inuit. Nakumik.
Thank you very much, Mr. Obed and Mr. Hicks. We're going to go right into a round of 7-minute questions, and I'll use the cards just as we have done. But before we get started, we had hoped to go from 3:30 to 5 with you, 90 minutes, but we had to start 20 minutes early. So if the committee members agree, I'm going to split that 20 minutes between you and our committee work that comes after. So I'm going to propose that we go till 5:10 with your questioning, and then we'll have committee business from 5:10 to 5:30, if that sounds okay with everybody. Okay. The first question is from Michael McLeod, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mr. Hicks and Mr. Obed for the presentation. This is a huge issue across the North, as you've indicated. I'm from the Northwest Territories, and I chair the Northern Caucus, and we've had several discussions around this, not into a lot of the detail that you've presented here today, but just kind of looking at and comparing the issue in our writings. And we recognize that Nunavut has a crisis situation, and in the Northwest Territories we have a crisis situation. Labrador has indicated they have serious issues in that area to the point where it's a crisis situation also. But then we look at Yukon, and it's not the same. It's not quite the same. So we automatically try to point to, well, is it because they have roads? Is it because they're not as isolated? Do they have is the quality of living better there? And it's really hard, and I think everybody is trying to be, point to the actual issue, but it's a big, broad issue, and it's something that's intertwined in many aspects of living in a small community, living in an Aboriginal community, and lack of opportunity, poverty, all these things come to the forefront. But I still wanted to check with you, hear what you got to say about the factor of isolation and how that plays into suicide. I read your report, and it's a very good report, and I appreciate it. It brought a lot of information forward, and you've looked at it from different angles, but I don't hear you saying anything about isolation. That's my first question.
Thank you for the question. If you look at the map that I have, there are many isolated communities in Nunavut with not very elevated rates compared to other parts of Nunavut. So I don't think that isolation in and of itself, there's a general pattern that Northern First Nations people have lower rates than Inuit. Dene in the Northwest Territories have a lower rate than Inuvialuit. Northern Quebec, the Cree have a lower rate than the Inuit, and they share a land claim. So there's larger factors at work. I can't claim to have come up with an explanation for all of them, but I don't think there's any evidence that isolation per se is a factor. However, across the North, for Inuit, we are seeing that the rates for suicide of young men are falling in the cities, and that it's some of the more traditional, which is a strange term, but traditional communities where they're the highest, which is kind of the reverse of the way some people might think it would be if one takes a cultural continuity perspective. I mean, Inuit, generally speaking, have very high levels of cultural continuity, as do Dene. But if it's only about cultural continuity, then how come some of these smaller communities have higher rates than Iqaluit? And in Greenland, it's very much the case, and Alaska. I think a lot of it has to do with the realities of being a young man in today's world, and how you see the future, how you've grown up, whether your family was happy, what your peers are like, whether you can see a future that makes sense for you. Can you see a path to being happy, healthy? Can you see graduating from high school, getting a job, getting an apartment, getting a girlfriend, Getting a boat? You're still an Inuk. still speak Inuktitut, you still go hunting, and there are communities where there's just a lot less hope, and I think in part it's because of weaker services and more trauma from the past. But isolation in and of itself, I'm not sure how we would wrap our head around that.
It's a difficult one. I look at the communities in the north, and I look at my hometown where we've never had a suicide, and I look at another community that has never had a suicide. Now, we have road access, but there's other community, Delaney, they've not had a child in court for 14 years. They're doing a lot of things right. And I said, well, what's the connection? What is the link? And the cultural connection to the land, hunting, fishing. I get excited and then think, well, that's the solution. But then I look at all the communities around it. They all have the same thing too, and yet they have issues in this area. So I don't know if there's one area we can point to. So, I'm glad that you've mentioned that this is something that need to be dealt with from many angles, and education, opportunity, all these things have to play a role. I'm really interested in seeing your report come forward. I'm very interested in seeing how we would deliver programs and services, how we would include mental health services, treatment, all these things that need to be in a community. And I'm not convinced that a political organization has or should be delivering these type of programs. I look at programs or delivery agents such as Friendship Centers, Aboriginal Head Start, and they're not tied in with the political community organizations, and they're independent. And I'm just wondering if there's been any thought in how programs and services could be delivered in communities other than government.
I'll start with the first question that you had. And instead of trying to spitball about what possible scenarios underlie why there are elevated rates of suicide in some communities rather than others, we have chosen to focus on the established evidence on what the risk factors are for suicide. And we do have some Inuit-specific research findings, such as child physical and sexual abuse, or early teen cannabis use, or low educational attainment. So no matter what scenarios play out in the varying rates across Inuit Nunangat, we know that if we apply evidence, that we will do what is best for our society as a whole. On the other part about what organizations are best suited for the delivery of services, the national strategy that ITK will be releasing does not imagine that ITK will be delivering programs or services in Inuit communities or nationally. We are in many ways trying to create an overarching unification for all Inuit on this issue, and then leverage the role that we can play at the national level to ensure transformative action at our community levels.
Thank you. The next question is from David Yerdiga, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Obed, Mr. Hicks, thank you for presenting today. Your information that you presented was very informative, and I think, together, everybody involved, we can make a difference. And, and in my community, again, we have some communities that have the same sort of economy, but one does better than the other. And like my colleague, Mr. McLeod mentioned, what is it? And that's the thing we're trying to figure out, what makes one community different than the other. And some people attribute it to leadership. Now, I'm not sure if leadership plays a big role in the rate of suicide. One leader is more active in providing services for the youth. Is this one of the key components, is lack of leadership, or maybe lack of resources for the leadership to implement different programs? So, Mr. Obed, do you have any comments on the leadership role that different communities play?
Mm-hmm. There have been a number of discussions over the past decade about best practices in suicide prevention. And it's difficult because the area of research around suicide prevention is highly subjective. And there are many differing views about what constitutes suicide prevention. The mere fact that there have not been completed suicides in a community does not imply that there is a high level of suicidal ideation in those communities. So, and we know very little about suicidal ideation or those who think of suicide in relation to what we know about deaths by suicide. So I think that the conversation has to be informed by as much evidence as we possibly can have. And as far as leadership in a community or a region by region basis within the Indigenous community of Canada, yes, there are amazing things that are happening, and that we should definitely work to find those great things that have happened or are happening, and that we should replicate them. But in the end, we're talking about social equity. And at the base of this issue is social inequity. So we can talk around this issue all we want, but if we don't provide healthcare, housing, education, and a basic level of security for all Canadians and all Indigenous Canadians, then this issue is not going to be addressed the way that it could be.
Thank you. You know, if I came from a small remote community of, say, 150 people, what type of schooling can I receive, and what type of economic opportunity is there for me to build a home and provide for my family? And I think that's essentially what opportunities are there if I lived in a remote community.
Well, the right to be educated until grade 12 in many of our Inuit communities wasn't realized until sometimes in the early 1990s. In many cases, people were in residential school until that time period. So now single one of our communities has educational opportunities, but there are many communities that do not allow for any of their students to go directly into the program of their choice within post-secondary, because of the lack of infrastructure and the ability for different schools to teach some of the core curriculum that are prerequisites for some university courses. So we have challenges in providing education, but I believe that the education systems are a lot better than they ever were and continue to improve. As far as opportunities in small communities, there are different ways of thinking about opportunities. Many Inuit want to live in a mixed economy, one in where they have some sort of wage-based employment, but also have enough time and opportunity to live on the land in many ways and provide sustenance for their families with country food, or provide their families and themselves with the connection to the land that allows for them to have positive mental health. So there need to be more opportunities for Inuit, especially in small communities, but it also we have to rethink what constitutes a successful community. And our small communities can thrive. It's just a matter of understanding how to provide the supports and the equity to ensure that they have that opportunity.
Thank you. Do you believe that lack of economic opportunities is linked to the increase in suicide rates? Do you think that not being able to obtain a full-time job, not being able to provide for your family as you would like, is that a contributing factor?
I'd say that poverty is definitely a part of this discussion. The way that it sometimes has been the solution to this issue is irresponsible. But economic development and economic opportunity is absolutely a positive for families and for individuals.
Could I just follow up on
Sure.
that? If you look at the American data, you'll see there's been a 24% increase in suicide in the United States in the last 15 years, driven by an increased rate among white people living in increasingly newly economically depressed regions. There's a clear correlation between job losses, unemployment, social despair, and suicide. But I would note that in Nunavut, many of our smallest communities are among our lowest suicide rate communities. It's not a simple correlation.
We'll have to leave it there, David. We're out of time. Okay. Next question from Georgina Jolibois, please.
Thank you, Mr. Obed and Mr. Higgs. I appreciate your presentations. I'm sitting here and I too feel frustrated from a subjective perspective and then from the objective perspective. Regardless, we in Canada, if you live in the north, like the territories, and the mid-north, the provinces, I come from northern Saskatchewan. I feel frustrated because every time we hear on the news or we are subjected, our friends and family, we hear that someone has died due to suicide. It's a painful process and it's not a very pleasant experience to experience. And yet when we look to services and programs, and there's different levels of solutions, of areas that we need to look at. And I appreciate the report that you're talking about, and I look forward to reading it because I want to gain thorough understanding as to what it is, the difference between the far north, the territories that you're experiencing. Subjective. What elders, and in your perspective, what elders do elders play a key role in the healing process in your area?
Thank you for the question. Inuit were, and this is subjective as well, but had to have been some of the most resilient people on the planet. The experiences that many Inuit had to go through to survive on the land is extraordinary, and there are many accounts of Inuit who went through starvation or the Spanish flu epidemics in the 1918-1919 period, where whole communities were wiped out except for some small children. The stories that our elders tell us about what they had to go through to survive is powerful and uplifting in so many different ways. And so we need to harness that sort of resilience and try to understand the power of that resilience in transferring that to those who live today. And elders have that key knowledge about why they responded to incredibly difficult situations in the way that they did. And so their wisdom and their life experience needs to inform the way that we think about this issue. Also, the very tenets of Inuit society, the foundation that we live in, is something that our people are saying that we want to return to those ways, and that culture and language and our history is essential for our well-being. So we need to ensure that we give our children and we give our societies our teachings and our perspective on the world. That sometimes is in relation to suicide prevention, and sometimes it's in relation to community development, to getting back to the place where we were as a society, and to feeling as though that we are fulfilled in the way that we interact with all of our elders and the way in which our communities function. So I would say that Inuit society has a great and Inuit history, and our elders have a great deal to play in informing us about how to be resilient, informing us about how we can be healthy again, and then also in relation to suicide prevention specifically, in supporting our society to heal from what it has gone through.
I have another question. From the objective point of view, and we as Canadians, here we are in this hearing from an objective point of view where you've provided some feedback. What message can we carry with us to do our work as parliamentarians to make sure that we keep on track with the messages?
First and foremost, I do not believe that it is respectful for the government to prescribe solutions for Indigenous peoples when it comes to suicide. Many of the reasons why our communities are the way they are is because of colonization and because of programs and policies of the Canadian government that have created historical and intergenerational trauma. So now to say that without true partnership with Indigenous Canadians and representatives of Indigenous Canadians, that the Canadian government will do this to prevent suicide is another form of speaking on our behalf and not actually partnering in an Inuit to Crown or nation to nation way. The second part of that is that social equity is necessary, and that we have so much to do to be able to ensure that all Canadians have equity, and that within the Inuit community, there are very specific, simple, straightforward measures that we can take to do that. And as Canadians, we all should believe that we demand equity within Canada.
Thank you.
Use it.
What message can we give to our youth?
Thank you. That is a wonderful question. Youth are often expected to come up with solutions in a vacuum within this issue. And I know that youth carry a tremendous burden already, expectations from their families, from their communities, and with themselves about who they are as Indigenous people, who they are as Inuit in my case. And often I believe that we don't do enough to ensure that they have the necessary ingredients to succeed. And there's so many of our youth that have succeeded in despite of the systems that are undermining their potential and their ability to be strong and proud Inuit. So I commend our Inuit youth for all that they are doing and all that they have said that they wanted for society. But I also say that we need to demand a better future, and Inuit youth need to stand up and say in very clear ways that the realities that they have lived through are not acceptable, and that we all can do better to improve the lives of Inuit youth.
Thank you. Thanks. Next question from Don Rusnak, please.
So thank you for coming to the committee today. Nice to see you again, Mr. Obed, and nice to meet you for the first time, Mr. Hicks. Since we begun this study, I've been hearing from a lot of people that the suicide is simply a symptom in Indigenous communities of all the problems that exist. So some people have been telling me that we need to work on a two-stage solution to the problem. The first stage being immediately getting in there with health workers and dealing with the problem in communities immediately. But the long-term solution is economic and self-determination. So allowing the communities to, or creating the environment for the communities to prosper and the people within them. What would you have this committee recommend to all our ministries, but most importantly the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, to immediately help and then to long-term prevent this from continuing?
In the development of the National Inuit Suicide Prevention Strategy, we have worked with Health Canada, and hopefully on day one, on July 27th, there will be commitments from the Government of Canada to work with Inuit on the first steps towards suicide prevention. And across the government, there are responsibilities. And this is not just a health issue. This is an issue that has many different aspects. I also want to respond to the concern or the discussion about self-determination. Our objective is self-determination. The link between our rate of suicide and relative self-determination or self-determination within a governance model is something that I would say does not have an evidence base within the Inuit reality. Perhaps in other jurisdictions there is a clear correlation between self-government or self-determination and the link with suicide rate. But for Inuit, Greenland has been self-determining for some time. Their rate is elevated and is in similar terms to the Canadian rate. So I believe that self-determination demands self-government and free, prior, and informed consent and a number of different concepts that this government is struggling with to try to understand what it actually means for the relationship. And we should go full steam ahead on all of those discussions. But to tie it directly to suicide prevention, I believe is a stretch. Perhaps with greater research and greater understanding of this issue, there will be more concrete ties. But there are many holes in what we know about evidence on this, and which is why we have tried in the development of our strategy to have a foundation of evidence rather than a broad sort of grasping of different things that may sound plausible.
So the immediate solution in your mind is not to. Sorry, I'll back up there. So the immediate solution is treating it as I believe you said before as a public health policy,
Yeah.
And having a strategy. Working with the Inuit and working with organizations in the areas that you represent to have culturally based and culturally sensitive either workshops or programs for Inuit. Have there been any of, or has that been attempted by any previous government, or has it been attempted in recent memory? And if it has, what have the successes been?
From the federal level, the only program that I'm aware of that has been introduced was the National Aboriginal Youth Suicide Prevention Strategy. And there was an Inuit-specific framework that was associating that, and that was approximately 10 to 15 years ago. And that largely funded community-based programming, was not specific in many cases to counseling or intervention in a suicide prevention specific lens. So what we need to do first is we need to do a better job of intervening for those who are at risk, identifying those at risk, ensuring that they have the care, that the mental health services that they need, the supports that they need. Also in the postvention, for those who have gone through trauma, there's been virtually nothing that has been done for Inuit who have experienced trauma in relation to suicide or have attempted suicide but then not received any sort of follow-up. So there are some very specific things that we can do that are immediate, that help fix in the very short term. But the larger issue, the public health upstream investments, if you will, that Canadians have talked about in a very nuanced way for other public health issues, must happen in relation to our communities. The environment of risk for suicide specifically, as it is created through a person's life, and then as it's created in a societal sense, needs to be addressed. There are often people in our communities that question why a particular individual died, and say usually they start off the conversation by saying, but they came from a loving home and they graduated from high school, and they often we don't get to the next part of the conversation, which is that person is in a society that has risk factors for suicide. No matter who you are, no matter what individual situation that you have, you are connecting with risk. Even the idea that exposure to suicide is a risk factor for suicide is something that needs to be better understood and appreciated in the way that we look at this issue within our communities.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move now into, we've got to keep moving along, but perhaps, Mr. Hicks, you can slide a response in the questions ahead. We're going to move along to the 5-minute round of questions, and time is moving quickly, so I would invite members to try to come to your question as quickly as you can without too much preamble. And the next 5-minute question is from Harold Albrecht, please.
Thank you very much to both of you for being here. The incredible grasp that you have on this is very humbling for me, I'll tell you. I had the opportunity to look through the outline of your resiliency within paper that you've done, and I certainly applaud many of the initiatives here, and I could go through the 8 chapters and list many of them, and I think it's a great program. My question in regards to this is, has there been any consultation with the Public Health Agency of Canada in the development of the federal framework for suicide prevention, which is to be implemented sometime later this year? The Public Health Agency of Canada was charged with the responsibility of implementing the Bill C-300, the federal framework, and I'm just wondering what kind of collaboration happened between the Government of Canada and the ITK or the Government of Nunavut in terms of developing your program. Certainly, I wouldn't want to imply that the framework should supersede or even be over it. In fact, that's one of the reasons we chose the word framework rather than strategy. We wanted something that was available to be contextualized in different communities across Canada. But I think there should have been, I'm hoping there was some degree of consultation with the Inuit community.
I'll speak specifically for Inuit Tapiri Kinatsumi. We have been engaged in those discussions with Public Health Agency.
You have been.
But all the way through those discussions, we have advocated for an Inuit-specific approach that the Public Health Agency and Health Canada can also adopt in partnership with us to work on suicide prevention.
Right.
Because the ways in which risk is distributed in our communities is so different than the Canadian population that it demands a very Inuit-specific approach.
And I couldn't agree more. I'm not implying that the framework should in any way supersede what you're doing there. And I applaud, again, I want to say I applaud what you've done here. In terms of protective factors, and I found this paper that you handed out very, very helpful, the cultural continuity, community cohesion, family strength, and so on. One of the things that may be missing, or maybe we simply haven't stated, is an area that I am very passionate about, and that is the spiritual component of who we are as humans. And I know there's been a lot of research done on that. In fact, you may be familiar with this book on clinical research for suicide prevention. And one of the comments this author makes, as it relates specifically to Indigenous communities, I thought was very insightful. I'll quickly read it. It indicates that similarly, activity participating in spiritual practices on a regular basis was found to buffer against suicide. And he's specifically speaking to Indigenous youth suicide in Canada in this regard. So I'm just wondering what aspect of the spiritual community, whether it's the Indigenous faith community or other faith communities, you mentioned faith communities in your opening remarks, which I was pleased to hear. Could you comment on what component in terms of prevention, intervention, and even postvention, what responsibility does the faith community have in that regard? And either one of you.
In our work in Nunavut, we recognize that the people who deal with the phone calls at 2 o'clock in the morning, be it a mental health crisis or suicide, mentions of suicide, are often members of the faith community. They're just solid people, and they exist in every community. One of our goals was to offer those people, ask them, what training would you like? There are issues of how seriously fly-in health workers treat those people. I mean, they don't claim to be social workers or nurses, but they are really solid community residents. So certainly in Nunavut, I value those people tremendously. And when we did our work, that's the first people you talk to in the communities quite often. And the working group that has always had a representative, it rotated among the different faiths. There's no question that a strong spiritual grounding in any society is a protective factor. But not everybody has that.
And I'm not implying that it's the magic solution. I wasn't implying that, but I just think it's unfortunate if, as mental health care workers or political people, that we leave one tool out of the toolbox. It's not the only tool, but it's one of many that I think we should be utilizing. Do we have any time?
You've got 10 seconds.
Okay, 10 seconds would be great. Could you identify, Mr. Hicks, is your assist training the same as Safe Talk training? Is that sort of the same thing?
Safe Talk is from the same organization. Okay. It doesn't teach intervention skills. Okay. It's more, they have a suite of programs.
Observation.
Some are just, the idea is to teach you something about suicide behavior, and in the event of you noticing something, who are the assist-trained
Correct.
people you can connect them with.
Thank you. Thanks for your
Developed in
patience.
Canada, in Alberta, I would point out.
Thank you.
Very good. Mike Bosio, please.
Thank you both for being here. Jack, your work is renowned, and we appreciate it. And Natan, once again, coming to this committee, you really do have a tremendous handle on your community, and commend you for that. The funding formula that exists, I mean, Don was talking about, or Mr. Rusnak was talking about self-determination and self-government, and the funding formula that exists for Nunavut and Inuit communities. Is it the same as it is in others, contribution agreements and grants type programs?
There's a wide variety of ways in which healthcare funding and mental health funding flows to Inuit communities. The First Nations and Inuit Health Branch has contribution agreements, sometimes with Inuit-specific providers, sometimes with governments. There is the overarching transfer for the government of Nunavut. Then within provinces, the province of Quebec and the province of Newfoundland and Labrador interact with our Inuit regions for funding for healthcare.
So a lot of it is it's a hodgepodge of different funding, dependent upon what the program is, dependent upon what the project is, and there is an overarching fund that happens. But I guess what I'm getting to is these are typically geared for a very specific area, and there's not a lot of control as to what can happen to that money beyond that area. Correct? Mm-hmm.
Yes. In many of the Public Health Agency and Health Canada First Nations Inuit Health Branch programs, yes, very specific terms and conditions around the type of services that can be provided and who provides those services.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, we've done studies on suicide, we've done studies on health, we've done many different studies out there. Has a study actually ever been done, and Jack, maybe you can help with this, on the funding required to bring about social equality?
Well, our experience in Nunavut is that a strategy without a budget doesn't accomplish very much. And hopefully that's going to be rectified very soon. We're told it is. I mean, that's basically the story. Quebec put public money into a coordinated strategy to fund a range of activities. When the WHO recommends that every country have a national strategy, they mean an adequately resourced strategy. It would cost some money. I don't like to view it on these terms, but I really think suicide prevention pays for itself. Suicide costs government a lot of money.
Well, and it's part of what you're getting at is where I'm leading to next in Quebec. I mean, I've been to Mistissini, so I've been up into the north with the Cree people a couple of times, and I was there in the early mid '80s, and it was a very different scenario from when I was there in the mid 2000s in 2005. I couldn't believe the transformation that had occurred within that community and within that society, and it was as a result of the $10 billion that they had received from the Quebec government for the hydro dam. So they had a lot more self-determination, self-government over the types of services. It was a beautiful community, and you could see that it gave them the pride in the community was incredible, right? And I think, that's part of this puzzle here, is that we've got to figure out how we get that social equality, the funding levels that are required for that social equality, to get pride back in the community, to get hope back in the community for a future, for our youth. And that's the expectations we set up for our youth today are so high, but if there is no hope to achieve any of those expectations, then that leads down a very dark path. Would you agree with that?
May I suggest you need to go one step more upstream? Adverse childhood experience. That's what the global literature speaks to. When Nunavut was created in 1999, there were 7 Head Start programs. 16 years later, there are 7 Head Start programs. After all these years of high rates of child suicide, why does every child in Nunavut not have access to a Head Start program? The communities that have them, and the federal government's own research says it's brilliant.
Sorry to cut you off, Jack. I got one more point I'd like to make, though, and that is we're in crisis situations right now, and if you look at a number of other areas from health standpoint, when you're in a crisis situation, whether it's an outbreak, right, you need to attack it with a lot of resources, get it under control, and then put in place long-term resources to maintain a certain level. So would you agree that that's part of what's missing here today, is that if we've got a crisis there from a mental health standpoint, or from an addiction standpoint, or an abuse standpoint, that we need to attack it with resources very specifically within the community?
In partnership, yes. While there's absolutely no reason why we can't start investing in the well-being of children at the same time. No reason.
Okay. Thank you. Next question from Arnold Viersen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Natan and Jack, for being here. Much appreciated your presentation today. It's been informative. I don't have a lot of questions for you today. I think your presentation has been amazing. This piece of paper right here, particularly the risk factors, I've just been doing my own reading, and that's probably the number one thing is if we can mitigate the risk factors. We've worked really hard on the protective factors for a while, specifically mental health. Every time there's a suicide crisis, it's a call for mental health workers. We need more mental health workers. I mean, we need to get, that's entirely Band-Aid solution. We need to get past that and work on. I think you touched on it a little bit, is that there's just a culture of suicide, and we have to work to change that culture a little bit. Natan, can you just explain that, broaden that out a little bit for me? Is that correct terminology to be using, like maybe a culture of suicide, and what? Like I have no experience with that. What you're talking about, it's foreign to me. But if you can just broaden that out a little bit and say, like, this is what it exists in a community that's suffering from suicide. These are some of the things that, when I read here about family strength, like, to me that seems obvious, but when you write it on a piece of paper, it's suddenly, oh yeah, we got to worry about family strength, and so what does that come? How does that play in it, and community cohesion? These are things that are foreign to me, in the fact that when I look at my own life, those things exist in my own life, and I can't see a reality without them. So if you could maybe speak to that a little bit.
Thanks. The normal, we call it, say, suicide is normalized in our communities. And the reason why we say it that way is because, as I said in my opening statement, everyone is affected, and everyone from a very young age understands very graphic details about it. And so about how it happens, about how a person is affected, and how then people's life course is altered, and whole families and whole communities' life courses are altered by suicide in a way that envelops all of us. And that's just something that does not happen in most of Canada, where there are specific families per se, or perhaps there are high-profile cases of a death by suicide. But it is not an environment that children grow up in and understand as just a part of how their community functions or does not function. And so the root of this, and stemming from the 1970s when the rate of suicide increased, and the dysfunction in many cases in our communities that has been passed down from generation to generation, all plays into that factor of why we are the way that we are today. And families being broken up because people didn't have mental health services. People couldn't heal from the things that tore them apart, whether it was physical or sexual abuse as children, whether it was that they were in residential school from the time they were 5 to the time they were 18. There's so many different things that happen in our society over a short period of time that led to people not being able to deal with the things that we all take for granted. Love of your partner, love of your children, love of your family, the ability to overcome difficult situations in life. These are all things that need to be created when there is a vacuum in an individual. And that is the reason why there is hope for us, because you can build resilience, you can build coping mechanisms, you can heal from things that you've gone through. What we've been saying is that we have not been given those opportunities. We don't have the mechanisms to do that, and we've been asking for them now for generations and still don't have them.
That's my. I
15 seconds.
swear it's shorter with me.
It always seems that way.
Thanks so much.
Thank you both. I apologize. The next question is from Gary and Andesangri, please.
Thank you, Jack and Nathan, for being here. Nathan, welcome back. I want to kind of probe a couple of statements that you made earlier with respect to the delivery of the execution of the strategy. So from what I understand, ITK is the lead on the strategy, but in terms of execution, it'll be through different agencies, or will it be through governments, or how do you really envision this rolling out once you do the announcement on July 27th?
In many ways, the communication with all Inuit and with all Canadians about why suicide presents itself the way that it does and what we all need to do to prevent suicide is one of the key parts of why this initiative, because we, as I said earlier, don't have that unification yet. And I believe that we need to in order to all push in the right direction to prevent suicide. So our strategy imagines different concepts that some will be our advocacy to government. Some will be our network of suicide prevention strategies from the community level to the regional levels to the national level that all work together to provide supports for Inuit wherever they may be. And some are going to be specific actions that ITK can take to adopt programs or facilitate the creation of different resources that can be then apprised of by Inuit regions or Inuit communities. So in many cases, we are in the middle facilitating change, advocating for change, and working with communities and Inuit regions to ensure that those things are possible and that we imagine them in the same way and that we approach them together. So at the center, we are going to play a lead role in that advocacy work, but also in filling in the key gaps in knowledge. The idea that we don't have ethnic identifiers in any of our jurisdictions except for Nunavut, and the idea that in the creation of our own strategy in 2016, we had to hire outside help to work directly with coroners' offices to get Inuit-specific suicide data that just does not exist, because the data that does exist is community-structured data, not Inuit-specific data on the national level. We need to create those changes to ensure that we have the understanding about how our communities are affected by this and what works. So the evaluative process over time to ensure that anything that we are doing and doing together is having a positive effect. And if it is not having a positive effect, then adapt and ensure that whatever we do, we can say that we can see a difference in the population over time. This, of course, isn't a 3 to 5 year thing. This is a generational push, but we can understand how we're doing along the way.
Now, in terms of the government's involvement, what do you envision both health as well as Indigenous affairs? What do you see their roles to be in supporting the strategy? And in terms of keeping in mind that there is a longer-term nation-to-nation relationship that needs to be developed, but that in the absence of that right now, how do you see them supporting your work?
First and foremost, I would like for there to be a change in the way that government respects Inuit in how it articulates this issue. There are questions every day in the media, and there are statements that are made on a very regular basis about suicide prevention and how it will happen for Indigenous Canadians. And for the Inuit component, we need to work on those together, and we need to have shared perspectives on moving forward. It is the only respectful way to address this issue. Specific interventions and investments are going to be necessary from different federal departments. Also, the time that departments need to take to understand those issues in an Inuit-specific context can't be overlooked as well, because many of the federal departments still function as if all Indigenous people lived on reserve, or that the obligations or the realities are the same for Inuit as they are for other Indigenous Canadians. So we have a long way to go, but I would imagine a reality in which we can work together to find investments that make the most sense, that change the reality in the way that we all want to change.
Okay, thanks. We can just squeeze in a final 3-minute question from Georgina Jolibois, please.
I'm curious, can you provide, when you speak about the true partnership nation to nation, from your perspective, from the youth, the families, the elders, and the leaders, how does that look like?
The renewed Inuit to Crown partnership, and that's the term that we as Inuit have used, starts with the respect for Inuit land claim agreements and the Inuit governance structures that have been created under land claim agreements. And in our 4 regions, we have different governance models, but they are all based on these comprehensive land claim agreements with the Crown. And our populations are all invested in those agreements. And the shared future that we imagined when we signed those agreements still in many ways has yet to come. And so moving up in a path together between Inuit leadership and the federal government and jurisdictions in which Inuit reside has to come with that shared sense of partnership. And that can be seen through the Government of Canada working with our leadership to create this change and not going beyond it in cases where it can, and just have relationships with public governments in jurisdictions in which Inuit reside, or with Inuit organizations or community-based organizations that are not the representatives of Inuit. And that is a way in which everyone can feel as though there is this new change. And within the Inuit democracy, if you will, we do have youth organizations, we have women's organization. We are structured in such a way that our voice can be utilized in a very specific response to specific questions. So seeing all that function and is something that is an ongoing challenge for us, because we don't have the historical connections to success. We haven't been recognized in the same way that perhaps other Indigenous representation groups have, and our land claim agreements have not been implemented in the way in which many Inuit have felt that they need to be. So we look forward to this shared path moving forward.
I'm there. Would you like to make a comment?
Request? Just once again, as we've done in the past, there are so many questions that are asked here that it's impossible to get a real answer out. And I would just invite both of you, if you have any further comments that you'd like to add to it, if you could please send them in to the clerk, and we can get them on the record. Especially some of the stuff like I was trying to lead towards the Quebec. Why are they successful, right? So anything you can add there would be greatly appreciated.
Okay. Mr. Obed, Mr. Hicks, thank you both very much for this compelling, rich testimony. It will be extremely helpful as the work of the committee proceeds. Thank you very much for your time today. We'll just suspend for 2 minutes and then come back in camera for committee business. Thank you.